Everybody, welcome back. This is the End of the World with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
I'm Stu, and today we are talking about The Purge from 2013, directed by James DeMonaco and produced by the legendary Blumhouse Production Studios.
Mm-hmm.
What's your history with The Purge, Michael? Is this something that you saw when it came out or watched when it was on?
This was the first thing. I mean, obviously, I'm aware of the Purge franchise.
Sure. How could one not be?
Sort of like in learning about it, I guess I just intuited that I would want to stay away from it. I just like, that's got to be pretty fucking stupid. And then the only reason it even came back in my mind is I remembered there was an election year version. And as we touched on in our election coverage, we were going to do it right after the election, but given the fact that there wasn't exactly the apocalyptic scenario that we had spoken of, combined with the fact that I think we were both kind of just a little worn out,
a little electioned out, if you will.
Yeah. So I just figured, why not take a peek? Because I do think the premise is still interesting, considering the current state of affairs. You know?
Yeah, I think. Definitely. The premise, the high concept that motivates the film, which is that essentially, and I like that we aren't given that many details about this in the first movie. It's just kind of, this is what's happening, here we go, this is the night, the Purge night unfolds.
Well, why don't you just lay out for, everyone probably knows, but why don't you just lay out that?
Well, basically, some new founding fathers have come to reinvigorate a moribund United States. Mm-hmm. And one of the main aspects of their rejuvenation is to introduce this 12-hour period that happens annually known as the Purge. And during the Purge, all crimes are legal and no emergency services are available. And there's a theory behind this. It's a kind of Aristotelian theory, right? Which I'm thinking of Aristotle's theory of tragic drama, of course, as one always is. Which is basically that he saw tragedy, Greek tragedy in particular in Athens, as a social good because all the people of the city would gather for this annual festival of tragedies and a bunch of plays would be put on that are, tragedies, that Oedipus being the sort of archetypical example, right?
Yeah.
Where, and his thought was that people could see Oedipus's plight on stage and experience for themselves a kind of catharsis in witnessing this great man kind of brought low by forces largely out of his control, right? Mm-hmm. And that this was a social good because it was a sort of mass gathering where everyone could feel bad together. They could feel a mix of pity for Oedipus, oh, poor Oedipus, he didn't do anything wrong, and fear, what if I'm accidentally married to my mother and murdered my father? It's not hyper likely that state of affairs would come to be.
This is, of course, long before the days of 23andMe. So you were sort of left.
Yeah, it was every time you had a connection on one of the apps, it was a real roll of the dice, as it were. Yeah, but I think that's at the back of this, right? The idea that this is obviously.
I think you're right in the sense of.
Have I put my English professor hat on here a little too tightly?
In the sense of it being an interpretation, I think that it's fair. Given the lack of depth of the movie, I think it would surprise me if that was the inspiration, if you know what I mean. This seems to me fundamentally to be sort of speaking of archetypes, what's this the archetype for? For me, it's the archetype for the movie that manages to sell by saying one sentence. And then it really doesn't matter what happens after that. So what I mean by that is like someone went to a studio exec and was like, one day, everyone in America can commit crime. And guess what? It's legal. And then they just were like, okay, here's a few $1 million. Why don't you go do that?
Right. And I mean, the film is sort of archetypal of a new model in Hollywood, in that the budget was, I think, something like $3 million. They got a couple of very well-known stars attached, right? Ethan Hawke and Lena Headey, who was at this time, at the height of Cersei mania. Game of Thrones was the biggest show on television. And then you have one location, right? It's all in this mansion. There's a couple of establishing shots at the beginning of the neighborhood, but we don't have any like cut to Washington. How is the president like? There's a couple of media, television broadcast comes. It's a very bare bones in terms of locations.
And I think that like two things. Generally speaking, I think first that I like when these sort of near future things operate at a more of a microcosm, right?
Yeah.
I think that provides it sort of more weight behind it being more almost a thought experiment as opposed to a strict like hyper realist reading of all of the implications of whatever world you're building, and I do like that. But then I think the second thing that is kind of interesting about it, which we'll talk about in a bit, I think, but is that it strikes me as sort of similar to Civil War, which we talked about, in the sense that it's impressively apolitical.
Yeah.
Right. You have this political setup. It's set up by the new founding fathers. You don't really know what they're about. You don't really know how this came to pass. And what's interesting about the Purge at first blush is, and again, we'll talk about this towards the end of the podcast more, but is that the Purge, as one typically thinks of that, usually has like a political connotation to it, right?
Sure.
Whether it's draining the swamp or various purges
or
that we've
Robespierre, right? Like
exactly, right. And so, whereas this, and this is one of the reasons I just couldn't quite get to it. This was built on this idea of catharsis, but it didn't make much sense to me. And it sort of, I was willing to give it a bit of slack as a thought experiment, but the thoughts are just not there. It doesn't seem.
I mean, I don't think it's the deepest movie we've covered by a long shot.
Right. And maybe it was because of the success, but whether it was deliberate or not, it is a really smart way to begin a franchise that then expands out onto the streets. We have the Purge Anarchy, Purge Election Year, right? Like to start it in
the first Purge, right?
right. Like to start it with the nuclear family and have this very simple sort of home invasion storyline. I think makes sense if you are trying to make as many movies as you possibly can.
Right. And in that way, it kind of resembles Saw. Right, which is like the initial Saw movie. It's like these two guys are in a room. It's very bare bones, and then you can make Saw 2 through 17 or whatever.
Well, we'll get you to break down the opening of the plot, but it's also 85 minutes, which is
a delight.
A movie that it doesn't appear takes itself too seriously. Like I can see a movie like this getting made and people making it's amazing, and all of a sudden you're in for 2 hours and 40 minutes.
No,
this was a relief in that it felt almost like a television show.
I mean, it's almost like a bottle episode of a long running show, right? Like that idea of the bottle episode where when shows used to have like 25 episodes a season. There would only be so much budget. You kind of stretch that budget. So you'd have to do some episodes where it's like, I'm thinking of Star Trek. It's like everyone's trapped on the ship and there are no guest stars. There's no special, it's like we're going to like get this one done for absolute bare bone. And this movie has that quality with them just trapped in the house the whole time. So we meet our protagonist, who is James Sandin, played by Ethan Hawke, who is a security salesman. As you'd imagine in this Purge world, apparently the movie is set in the 2020s. I think it's 2022.
2022.
Yeah. And there's been, a decade of purges at this point? Something like that. I think 2013 was the first one, maybe. And as I said, we don't have a lot of background on how any of this came about, but it is, and we accept it. He is, as you'd imagine, very successful because what do rich people want more than anything else in the purge world? Not to be purged. And what's the best way to ensure that? Having, massive security doors that drop down on the night of the purge so that anyone who might be thinking of killing you can't get in. Brilliant.
Mhm.
So at one point later in the film, he says, think about it. Like, we were scrabbling to pay rent, and now we live in this huge mansion, right? He lives with his wife, Cersei Lannister, Lena Headey, and she has a black wig on for the movie that's
Yeah, just ill-fitting.
yeah. Like, again,
Ill-fitting.
but
Also had the trick, to me at least, of making her barely recognizable, even though I do know who she is. I sort of
yeah,
wanted to,
yeah.
like,
Well, she's always
sort of
been
to be like, oh yeah, that's Cersei.
she's chameleonic. I've seen her in a few other things, and it took me. And I had that similar.
Really?
Wait a minute, like, oh right. Well, she was, of course, also Sarah Connor in the Sarah Connor
Oh yeah.
Chronicles. Just a bit before her big star turn in Game of Thrones.
But this is like right out of the gates. This is them really, like, being willing to put everything on the nose throughout the whole movie, right?
Right. He's a security salesman, right?
His job is to literally sell the security, everyone's safe, and I wonder if it's going to work for him, right?
Yeah, and we see Lena Headey wandering through the neighborhood as everyone prepares for the purge, and some of the neighbors are gathering for a purge party where they're gonna watch various news feeds of horrific violence as it unfolds
Yeah.
across the
That's
city.
kind of like it's kind of how they get off on this similar sort of catharsis without engaging in it, right? Is to take part in the spectacle by viewing it. That, again, like, we'll talk about this in a bit, but I don't really understand how it achieves what they claim it achieves in the world of the movie. But, right, like, this idea that if everyone, because the basis is, the notion is that everyone can get it out of their system, kind of, that the philosophical weight that they directly say on screen is this notion of, like, we are all awful creatures that want to commit acts like this, or even need to. And so the government actually made this prudent decision to let people release the beast, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah,
Once
but there's also the reality we realize very quickly, and that is that the primary people who seem to be doing hunting are, in fact, rich people. Because
not just that, yeah, that's a huge part of it. But the thing that confuses me more is that, am I meant to believe that has helped eliminate crime outside of the 12 hours?
I think that's the concept.
And that's what doesn't make sense, is that when they make it so that it's just to basically become a purge of economically non-contributing members of society, right? That's supposed to give it a bit of weight, actually makes it totally pointless, because those people are often the ones that have to commit crimes.
Right, but now they're dead.
Right, but like the ones that are alive,
so there are fewer of them, so there are more resources to go to the fewer.
right, but
left.
like, if you're struggling to get by and you have to start stealing or whatever else, you're not going to stop because the rich people who live near you are able to kill anybody once a year, right? Like, I find it a little hard to square the idea that, like, this actually had the sort of positive impact that it claimed in the world. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm just kind of, like, leaning into their logic a little bit and saying, like, I mean, I think there's, like, almost like a Swiftian element to this, where I kind of wonder about that with the movie. Like, I don't think the movie means for us to take it seriously in that, like, this is a good idea that would work.
Right.
I read an anecdote about the director after some test screenings. People were like, we love the movie, and what's more, we should do this. and he was like, oh my God, no, like, that's not right. So
Right.
I think he's trying to sort of satirize kind of technocratic, Malthusian, if you will, like, population control fantasies And I think it
Right,
has.
because it's not like an individual rich person who can kill someone once a year wouldn't be committing like financial crimes the rest of the time still. That they would just stop doing that.
No,
You
that's
know?
true. That's true. Um, let's go through the rest of the characters. So there is son, Charlie, who
Yeah.
is maybe 11 or 12,
Mm-hmm.
and he has a little drone remote control robot guy that is a burned up child's doll. Why that
Hmm.
is, never explained. And
Never explained. Just becomes a useful plot.
yeah, as soon as I saw that, I'm like, I'm sure that won't be used later in the movie, right?
Yeah.
um, and the sister, who's senior in high school age, maybe, is Chloe, I believe is her name.
Zoe.
Zoe, my mistake. Right, I have that written down here. Zoe, how dare I? She has a boyfriend, and there's some
A bit
tension.
older. Yeah.
He's a little bit older. The father doesn't approve, I think is the
Mhm.
subtext. But when we first meet her, he has snuck into their house and is hooking up with her, and
Yeah.
you know,
And it also like is the first of I think a couple moments that are just amazing to me because it's like they're hooking up and then Zoe's like, you better go. You have to get home in time for the purge, which is starting in like an hour.
yeah,
And that's the first time I'm like, okay, man, like if I knew one day a year that shit started at 7 p.m., I'm probably like getting ready a few days before.
oh, I'm
Right? Like,
home at noon.
or another point that I would make would be to not even be home.
I'm gonna take a trip back to visit family in Toronto or whatever.
Yeah,
Right? Like,
and they do the same thing. The family does the same thing. So the family of four that we've just talked about is getting ready for their sort of like kind of humdrum, stay at home,
they
get through
have the dad is like asking them to go through their day. It's like, what did you learn today,
right.
Charlie? And
But also like, and they kind of do this to make you wonder at the beginning of the movie, the sort of first like suspense moment, I think, is he doesn't start the security system until like a handful of
6:55. Yeah.
yeah, it's like what are you talking about? This would never take place in any world where like and like it's not like to show that he's super confident in his system or anything. It's just like, well, it's time to press the button, and you're kind of like, oh, like my first inclination when I was watching it, which maybe was on purpose, is that like maybe something would go wrong with his security
And
system,
a
right?
subtle irony.
Right, but then it doesn't. He's actually okay. But like, why are these people driving around the neighborhood and handing out cookies and whatever else right before the purge? Like, just don't do anything that day.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think
Is it work? Is that what I'm supposed to believe?
we also get one of the many this won't play a role later moments just before Alina Headey gets home. She meets her neighbor who gives her these cookies and is like, wow, your new wing looks so beautiful. I guess those like security systems you've sold all the neighborhood are, they've really put you in a good place financially, right? It's just kind of like, oh,
In a way, we've all built this addition to your house. Like,
yeah, it's like, oh, gee, I'm sure that won't have any importance later.
and then
And
the neighbor sharpening his axe.
right, there's just a random neighbor sharpening an axe. It's a little ominous. There's also once the steel plates come down over their doors and windows, they have a security hookup that they're using to surveil the neighborhood. And he's like, he sees a couple neighbors going out, and he's like, "Oh, like Bob and Doug are going hunting. I didn't know they were friends." Or whatever. Like going hunting is just like, and the whole thing is kind of like an ultra violent Halloween,
Yeah.
as we come to see now. The whole plot. One thing I will give credit to this movie is it does not waste any time. It like goes directly into intense action.
Yeah.
And when Zoe goes back to her bedroom, she finds Henry, her boyfriend, he's there. What a surprise! Oh, but this is bad because if her dad finds out, he's gonna be pissed. What could Henry be planning to do on the night when murder is allowed? I have no idea.
If you take him at his word, he just wants to talk to the
Just talk
He
it
wants
out.
he wants to have a word with Ethan Hawke, and he'll see the error of his ways, and I'll show him how much I love you.
And
But of course, that is not what happened.
no. And simultaneously, Charlie is left alone to just watch the monitoring system with full access to the security panel. He sees an African American man who's been hunted by some local teens, as we come to find out, and he's begging for help. And against all rationality, Charlie decides to open the door, the security system. The man comes in, and he closes it. And Ethan Hawke is like, "Oh my God, what have you done?" Like, he comes out with his gun, and at that very instant, Henry appears at the staircase and is like, "Mr. Sandin." He has a gun as well. It's just like, oh my God, like this is like cross currents are colliding here. And he attempts to shoot Mr. Sandin, but misses and is in turn shot and killed by Mr. Sandin.
Right. So it appears as though the boyfriend's idea of showing that he should be able to keep dating Zoe was to kill the dad, and that somehow this would help his situation.
Yeah,
is that right?
It doesn't make any sense. I mean, he can do it in
doesn't make any sense at all.
He'll be free of legal consequences, sure.
Right. In fact, I would say that the son's reaction actually is way more rational. Like,
oh yeah,
an emotional reaction, but like I can still see you see this person struggling, and you have to decide whether you believe him or not. But he seemed believable, and you want to help him out because even in that moment, you don't want to see someone just get killed, right?
Of course.
So whereas this gentleman who's now found his way into the home runs away, right,
and hides in their massive mansion,
right,
after the shooting starts, right,
which again, like, is a little bit strange because you think you could take a crack at being like really thankful and pleased, can I stay here? And the guy who runs the security system and has the best security system presumably could be fairly confident that he's going to be okay. Right?
Yeah, I mean, he's also got guns, right? I mean, he's heavily armed.
Yes.
And now Henry, the other intruder, has been murdered. So
this is where it all gets so like convoluted. The guy runs away and he's just gone, and they just sort of like let him run away. Like, the house is big, but like it's still a house. Like, it, right? Like Henry is shot. The boyfriend is shot, and then there's like, Charlie, you stay in here. Zoe also runs away.
Yeah. Well, she's upset that Henry is dead.
Well, sure, but like, it's just a house. Like, get your people back together. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. But Michael, then the plot could not unfold. So,
sure.
Very soon we learn that, unfortunately, the group of young people who are all presented as these kind of demonical, sociopathic preppies, they were hunting the black person that they allowed into their house, and they have an ultimatum where they demand that Mr. Sandin, whom they appeal to as like a fellow rich person, there's this weird kind of, this is the only like political part of the movie where it feels like a little bit pointed, right? These are like basically these sort of affluenza killer types, right? Remember that trend a few years ago where these rich kids would kill people in terrible accidents or commit horrible sexual assaults on college campuses, and then would be given like a slap on the wrist because like you have so much potential, whereas a similarly aged black kid from the same town would be like sent away for life, right? I mean,
the villain who shows up at the door is referring to this person as a pig and homeless and useless, but it feels like there's still a racial component here.
Absolutely.
So, I think that the first thing that jumps out when the villain comes and explains, actually, you need to let him back out because this is the purge.
Right, he's a dirty homeless pig. Please just let us purge him. We see from the flowers you've put out, you support the purge. Right. So you know that this is part of the deal.
And then this guy who owns this security system, in fact, sells them,
admits.
is told, is told that they're going to bring a bunch of equipment that will actually quite easily defeat the security system, which he admits to his family.
It's not built for worst case scenarios, as he says.
Yeah. It's not built for the worst case scenario, which, one would think this is just like a medium case scenario. This is a purge.
Right. He doesn't have a tank. Like,
and it's like, why aren't there like guns on the outside of your house that if this comes down to it, you can just shoot these people who are trying to get into your house?
Also, like, the lack of a moat is really telling.
Yeah.
Now, Ethan Hawke really wants to just find the guy and turn him over and just get these kids out of there. Charlie, the son, has a bit of morality that his father lacks, and in fact uses his little drone to guide the man to a hiding spot in a attic-like loft, crawl space location where he hangs out as a kid. This would be great. He could hang out there. But a little while later, one of the other things is when I think in the credits he's called the polite purger, the kid that comes to the door. One of the other purge, they're wearing these ghoulish Guy Fawkes-esque masks, right? And one of them's like, ah, and he just pulls out a gun and shoots his comrade.
Yeah. Well, he's kind of trying to do it's like a pocketbook Heath Ledger kind of, right?
Oh, like the Joker?
Yeah, that's what it feels like.
Okay, yeah. I was thinking V for Vendetta, like a little, yeah, that.
Well, just like the hair, it kind of reminded me of that, of just like this is on like gleeful philosophical argument to why they need to be able to kill this guy.
Right, and he's also kind of like a dime store Nietzsche, like one of these Leopold and Loeb types who's like, we are superior, therefore we are allowed to kill, like this kind of thing. The homeless man is hiding in this little crawl space, but to our dismay, Zoe comes up to the drone and is like, I'm going to go into your secret hiding spot. It's like,
she knows.
She doesn't know that the guy's in there. But
she knows his secret hiding spot.
Right. Great secret. Yeah. So, lo and behold, she goes in and then immediately is
taken hostage
by the homeless man, the stranger, as he's called in the credits. And there's a kind of standoff where they stab him, they free Zoe, and they torture. They're like torturing the man.
Yeah, but it's still couched in some sort of necessity, right? At least in the justification of the protagonist, right?
Well, they have to kill this guy and give him over.
Well, they have to get him outside. They have to turn him over.
Right.
So the idea is they're going to tape him up, and he's obviously trying to resist. So they have to do that. And of course, Zoe doesn't want to make this person suffer this way, but just
no. And like Charlie is very against turning him over at all. But some kind of big SUV monster truck cars have arrived outside with chains that are going to apparently easily just pull off the metal security doors, which I don't feel like this would work, but never mind.
I mean, there's something kind of funny about like an America where there is a purge and they're just making money hand over fist selling these security systems that don't actually.
Yeah, I mean that does kind of that tracks. Yeah. So Ethan Hawke decides I'm not gonna give the guy. I'm gonna fight. We're gonna fight. And so he and his wife have guns. They split up. They're gonna cover different quadrants of the place, and thus the movie kind of just devolves at this point into a classic like home invasion movie. There's a couple jump scares. There's some shots fired.
And I think there was a missed opportunity with her, which maybe in a longer movie, but like the sense I got from her was that there was a chance that she was going to be the most interesting character, the wife, because I don't know if you got this sense, but in the first act, it felt like there was kind of a bloodlust in her, like to experience a purge, to actually like do it. And I thought that could have been a way more interesting way of like
if she ended up just going ham and like killing all these
not
people.
Even just that, but like they have that moment where the kid, Charlie, the young kid, like asks the parents like why they don't go and do
And
this.
they're like, we don't feel the urge, you know,
I don't feel
we're
the urge.
good.
And I kind of have the sense that I don't know if they were trying to portray this, but like that she kind of might have the urge to like sort of, live a little in this way. She's the housewife, and he goes and he sells his security systems, and they have their humdrum life. And that like maybe this year, she saw the neighbors. Well, they're out there. They're going hunting. Maybe I should go hunting.
Honey,
That's kind of
why don't you ever take me hunting, honey?
right. Like, that's kind of where I thought it was going. And I think it would have been a lot more interesting but again, I think it probably goes back to the limitations you're talking about. It's a few $1,000,000. It's one location.
Yep.
Sending her on the street might not have been in the cards, but felt like a bit of a missed opportunity to like have her become like a vigilante in the purge. So like I kind of envisioned that she would go out there and start taking out people who were trying to take out the sort of poor population who were being attacked.
So she could become the Purge Avenger or whatever.
Yeah, something like that. It seemed like
who will purge the purgers?
Because she didn't like her character is just
pretty undeveloped.
I mean, there's just nothing going on.
Yeah,
right?
It's pretty undercooked. I mean, the whole thing is as we've discussed. So we'll wrap this plot up pretty quickly because basically
we may as well.
There's a bunch of fights. The kids are all wearing these teens are wearing these crazed masks. They have axes, they have guns, they have various weapons. Ethan Hawke manages in his basement to kill a bunch of them. And there's a pool. There's a pool table. There's the scene where his hand is reaching for the pool ball. I was like, oh man, never seen anything like this before. Wow. And he finds it and he cracks the head, and just when you think he's kind of killed all his enemies, who should appear but the polite kid from the beginning? And he fatally stabs him. He doesn't die right away, but and as he's doing so, he kisses him on the forehead and is like, thank you for a beautiful purge or whatever. And he's like, oh, thank you for this unforgettable purge, Mr. Sandin. And then all of a sudden the neighbors appear, heavily armed, and we're saved. Hooray. Oh, unfortunately.
Oh, wait, do you remember that thing from the beginning?
yeah. It's like,
you said we were jealous about how much money you had.
Well, we've decided to kill. Oh, look, your husband's Ethan Hawke is already dead. Yeah. Well, we'll just have to kill you and the kids instead, right?
Our hands are tied.
This also leaves open the question, like, what happens to the people who get purged property? Like,
yes,
that's something to come back to in a minute. But, and the menace bully who murdered Ethan Hawke is shot by Zoe, but then the neighbors are going to kill them until at the last second, who appears but the stranger, the homeless person who takes the leader of the neighbors prisoner, and they resolve to just have no more killing, spend the rest of the night in peace. And there's a very awkward.
He's former military, right? He has the dog tags.
It seems like it, yeah. I mean,
which is again another thing of like, couldn't you just tell the family like I'm actually really good at this? Yeah. As long as I can like get some guns and we can set this up, we can take care of this. Like it seems like there was a way forward here that just kind of didn't get explored.
Right, and I think the idea is that he's been moved to help them because Ethan Hawke was willing to sacrifice himself to defend. He let him go. He was going to fight for him, despite having stabbed him with it. And it's they sit awkwardly waiting for the alarm to sound at 7 a.m.
Well, so eventually the tables turn and the family is once again in control. They've with the help of the stranger, they've overcome the threat of the neighbors. But again, I think a bit of a missed opportunity. The mother decides that we're all just going to calm down a little bit.
Yeah. We're gonna take a time out for the rest of this.
Let's all just take a time out and wait till the sun comes up. And then right before the purge ends, she breaks the neighbor's nose.
Well, the leader of the neighbors makes a play for her gun. Yeah. And in reaction, she just smashes her face with the butt of the rifle and then smashes her head into the table just for good measure. It's just a final.
Which I did find it funny that like then the alarm goes off, and the purge is over, and this woman's face is just completely destroyed, and just kind of like
Right,
has
and
to go.
the first thing you hear is like emergency sirens because presumably now it's okay to like take all these like horribly injured people to the hospital.
Right.
And as the
In fact,
credit, yeah,
you hear about how the hospitals are now overrun, which again is like
what are we doing? They don't have the extra beds ready for the one night a year they know will be filled with mass violence and injury. Like,
right. Plus, like, so wait, this isn't this bigger plot to get rid of all these economic.
Right, you're going to save some of these wounded people.
Now it's time to save them. Yeah, the whole thing is just
doesn't quite connect.
No.
So it's kind of a mess, but I think the concept is good, but it sort of gets lost in this sort of generic Panic Room style thriller. Remember Panic Room? Did you ever see that?
Yeah.
I was living in Berlin in 2002, and I went to see it in German, and I hated it. And saw it later in English and realized that I was right to hate it. Anyway, this has
I think the thing I like the most about the movie that is that it is. I know that I think this changes as the franchise goes on, but I kind of like that it's apolitical. I like the idea that in America, the purge is actually like used to sort of quell politics as a thing.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, oh, if you just can commit random acts of violence once a year, you would never have to, come for us. It's kind of like the feeling I got.
Yeah, and I mean, I was talking about Aristotle at the beginning of the episode, and this is obviously, a little bit more extreme than just watching a sad play together, right? I mean, I was thinking of like other historical antecedents for this kind of behavior, right? On the one hand, this is obviously like an instance of the carnivalesque, right, where the rules of society are turned on their head, although not in the true spirit of the carnivalesque, which was more like the rich man is poor and the poor man is rich. Right now, it's like there are laws, there are no laws, right? But I was thinking about extreme like social practices, like kind of ritual practices, and I was thinking of the ancient Carthaginians. And there's still a lot of debate about this, but in Carthage, in the ruins, in modern Tunisia, they found these things that are called tophets, where like perfectly healthy young children have been apparently ritualistically sacrificed to the gods. And it seems that this is just something the Carthaginians did, especially in times of extreme political pressure or stress. And it's not the same as the purge, but it's like an example of like a completely, to us, anti-social practice. And for a long time, the Greeks and the Romans who fought the Carthaginians at various points write about this, and people were like, that isn't true, that's just propaganda against them. But then like they started finding all the graves and like
it's kind of like it's an inverse built on the social norm, right? Like if the social norm is that there are periods where you are under siege, and so this becomes like an outlet, right? This ritualistic sacrifice. Then you can kind of see the parallel in American life, which they're kind of arguing in the movie, like the sameness of everything, the quelling of the animal inside you, has had all of these negative consequences. So we need to at least recognize that it exists. So it's almost like to have this sort of like a doctor's appointment, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not reacting to a siege like in the case that you're talking about, but instead it's helping to excuse the relative quietism of lives of these people, right?
Yeah, and I think the Carthaginians, interestingly, the children that were sacrificed were always, as far as we can tell, very wealthy. So it was like the richest people would sacrifice their children, which is, again, the inverse of what seems to be happening here, where it's like the rich children are out killing the so-called undesirables who are unable to like protect themselves. Another practice that I thought of was the sort of mob shamings that would go on in England and France from starting in the early modern period and through, in some cases, into the early 20th century, where in France it's called the charivari, and in England it has the immortal name of the skimmington.
They are great at naming things.
Have you ever heard of a skimmington?
No, no. What's
So
this?
basically, an example would be you found out that like a local businessman was having an affair
Mhm.
with the wife of another guy. Everyone would get up in costumes and they would go on a parade through the whole town with those people made in effigy in such a way that everyone would know who they were. And it would be like a ritual of public shaming where you'd be playing music and like dancing and again,
Yeah.
the kind of carnivalesque. And in some cases, you would parade right up to the houses of these people so that they, and they'd come out. In some cases, they'd be maybe tarred and feathered. In some cases, they'd be killed. Like if the transgression was more serious. I know about this because an example of it appears in Thomas Hardy's brilliant novel, The Mayor of Casterbridge, which is just one of the funniest, most dark, tragic comic novels of all time. And really worth a read if anyone's looking for a hilarious but also tragic book. And this kind of social practice, Devin O'Shea appeared on the QAA podcast recently and sort of discussed how these practices formed an important antecedent for an American terroristic practice undertaken in the post-Civil War era by the Ku Klux Klan, who would essentially, get up in costume and go to torment and murder black people whom they saw as, or maybe just who were just there, but also, specifically targeting people who they considered to have transgressed the social order. So,
Mhm.
I mean, you can also see examples in like the history of pogroms, be they of the racist KKK type, or even in Tsarist Russia, or the reason a lot of people of Jewish ancestry came to Western Europe and the United States in the early 20th century was because, there would just be pogroms when Christians and other people would just descend upon the Jewish neighborhood of a town and like set it on fire and try and kill everyone in this kind of frenzied night, right? And the most famous, example of this is probably Kristallnacht in Germany, when the Nazis just like teamed up to kill. So, right, there are these like moments in history that are sort of similar to the Purge and all bad, right? I mean, even the Salem witch trials, which I was kind of alluding to earlier when I was talking about like what happens to the property. Salem witch trials are thought of primarily as being kind of instance of like puritanical mass hysteria, right? Or mass psychosis, where it's like they're witches. But when a lot of work has been done on this, and when you like dig into it a little bit, a lot of the people who were accused of witchcraft, they also had like pretty desirable plots of land that some of the accusers kind of want, right? So in one respect, like, although as we've talked about, like the Purge is not particularly dense political allegory of any kind,
No.
I do like the idea of this sort of economic jealousy being a kind of undercurrent that like is at least powering the neighbor's desire to
Yeah.
murder the Sandins. So there are some like historical instances that are at least somewhat similar to this. Now, do I think this movie has anything like brilliant to say about any of that? No, I don't. But
Sure.
I just thought it'd be worth mentioning some of the background. Any final thoughts from you on the Purge, Michael?
I I didn't like the movie as a whole.
No, I didn't either. It was pretty torturous, even though it was only 85 minutes.
But I we won't do it next week. But I will be wanting to do the election year one eventually. Maybe in 2028 we can do one.
Sure.
Especially if there are no more elections.
Oh yeah, then it can be a kind of nostalgia trip,
Remember
right?
back to when there was,
And I have I won't reveal it now, but I do have a hilarious family connection to the Purge election year. But
yeah, we'll save that for 2028. Maybe 27 once people are going to like the Iowa State Fair, we can do that.
Okay, I like the theory. So do you remember what we're talking about next week?
No.
I do. It's Cormac McCarthy's novel, The Road.
Okay.
So we're going to be heading back to the literary world and back to pure post-apocalyptic.
And something that is really good too, which is always exciting and a little different for us.
Yeah, it's definitely true. So that'll be fun. In the meantime, if you like the show, you can follow us on Instagram at the end of the world WMS. You could write a review of the show on podcatcher of your choice. I've got to stop saying podcatcher of your choice, but
I like it.
I feel ugly saying it, but I also know that it's like a necessary evil, much like the purge. You know? And so we'll be back next time with The Road. And until then, this has been the end of the world with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I'm Stu, and we will talk to you real soon.